This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. Today is Sunday. As Dave does a quick check, this is already the 8th day of September 2019, and this is the Prairie Monk program, WEFT's weekly look at rails, trails, greenways, conservation, and all that sort of stuff. This is our only pledge drive show, so we would love for you folks. We actually have some folks standing by. If you wanted to give us a call here at 217-359-9338, you can only get programming like this here on WEFT, so please give us a call and make a pledge of any amount. $40 is a basic membership level, but anything larger or smaller would be cool too. And if you don't want to talk to a human being, you can go to our website, WEFT.org, and make your pledge there. Okay.
And it's WEFFest today.
WEFFest today, too, that's right.
Starting at 2 o'clock. And it's due to rain.
Right, but that's okay. We've got the Great Hall, so if it does actually start to rain, we'll just move all the fun inside.
Okay. So we have guests today, Fred and Nancy Tilcom. Comment?
Tilcomen.
Okay. I've seen it many, many times. Yes, you got to be right up on top. So, I want to say thank you first to Vermilion County. I was hoping to go to a Vermilion County visit to Doris Westfeld Prairie, and it's rather important. I wasn't scheduled to speak or anything, but I wanted to be there because Doris Westfeld got most of her seed from a Bronson prairie, which is just west of Oakwood, and it's really, very good remnant prairie, and we have very little left. And the talent would be to make sure that is not a wide trail that will take out all the prairie. So I didn't get there because I had 2 flat tires, and someone from Oakwood happened to come by and help me out to his name, I'm trying to think, Herschel, and he is very near that railroad right-of-way remnant prairie. The township supervisor has been mowing it. He's been discouraged from doing that, but then he's mowed on the roadside with a huge 15-foot bush hog, and that means he mows half the prairie because he doesn't like to be out in the road. So we need to supply a 4-foot mower. And I do this in Iowa, where they give you a midnight requisition, and they take out the big ones if you're on roadside stuff. So enough of that. This is, we have guests, Fred and Nancy Delcom, and let's look at Fred first, and he's an entomologist and neurophysiologist, retired from the Department of Entomology, and Nancy is from the has a long time been on the Park District, Urbana Park District. First of all, on UPDEC, which we know is an advisory group, and then on the board since 1909 or something.
It's a long time.
Yes.
It's been a long time, yes.
So just to start with, where did you grow up? Where is your name coming from? I understand it's somewhat Scandinavian.
Yes, it's an unusual name. I grew up in Detroit. Family emigrated from Denmark. Most of the Delcomen names are in Denmark or Sweden, but there are some in the United States. We don't know exactly where the name came from, but a couple of hundred years ago there was a name Delcommune in the Netherlands or Belgium, I forget which. So that's the origin. My grandmother was a great genealogy fan, but I haven't followed up on it.
Well, the Netherlands and Belgium gave us Frieslanders and Deutschlanders who came here and drained the whole community.
Oh, that's right.
So you're in the right place. You have one leg in physiology, I think. I remember doing sitting in on a course that C-Lad Prosser was running. There were electrons going everywhere. They had these tubs of some sort of creature that comes from Woods Hole or somewhere. They had eyes that could be researched, and he was into that. But he was into all sorts of things. So you were in that era, I think.
That's true. Lad Prosser was a great guy. He was a tremendous researcher. He was not such a great teacher.
But he wrote a great textbook. Because when I was an undergraduate, the Prosser Invertebrate Biology book
Prosser and Brown.
Prosser
right?
and Brown was my textbook. So it was an interesting trail to have gone from an undergraduate, first in Minnesota and then in Oregon, to the home of C. Lad Prosser.
So did you do biology too?
Yes.
What part of what sort of biology?
I just have an undergraduate degree in biology, but I ended up in Oregon because I was interested in marine biology,
Ah,
which is a
okay.
long way from grass and maybe seas of grass.
Yes. Likewise in Australia, I'm not necessarily near to the sea.
Oh, are you from the central part?
Yes. No, not
No.
so. No. I'm not in the desert part of Australia. On the coast, but not near the ocean.
Which part?
Between Sydney and Brisbane, where the bulge is. And we're near a plate tectonics where there's a mountain range, the Blue Mountains.
The Blue Mountains, yeah.
And so, and we had a neuroscientist named Eccles.
Oh,
Sir
Sir.
John
Yep,
Yes.
very famous.
and he got a Nobel Prize, and so he's well known in Australia. So
one of the people from Fred's graduate lab was from, is it pronounced Mooloolaba? It looked like Mooloolaba to us, but I think that's on the East Coast.
Yes.
Yes,
Most of the activity is on the East Coast
Yep,
because
yep.
the rest of it is dry.
Yep.
Rain moves across Australia and up and then deposits on that range and then runs fast out to sea. And if the Australians are clever, they capture that and send it back out into the slow-moving rivers to the west. And you have irrigation there. You're also in entomology. We have nits, gnats, and insects on weft. So May Berenbaum was a wefty at one stage, and she had a program.
It
A
does
lot of
sound
fun.
very Mayish. Yes.
That she did the film festival. So let's look at what you do on the Park District. We enjoy Busey Woods. At one stage, we were working with the Graduate College of Committee on Natural Areas, and the Busey Woods was sort of in limbo. It was being dumped for high-rise housing, and some of that is still there. And so the Busey family was not anxious to give it to a bunch of conservationists.
Yes, that's true. That is true.
So there's
Those
various
wacko
negotiations.
conservationists.
It got to be Busey Woods within the Park District, and it is wonderful to be there. It takes a little bit of load off the Brownfield Woods and Treeley's Woods,
It
which are
does.
more research woods.
Right, and people can enjoy the woods where the others are closed off, reasonably so. So it
Yes.
gives people a chance to go into the woods and
Yes.
appreciate the
And
beauty of
it's
it.
a little rough and tough, which means you can relate to the cemeteries around about, the golf course, the county fairgrounds.
Right?
They're all adjunct space to that little piece.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, it's just that little jewel right there
Yes,
in the
yes,
middle of
yes.
strangenesses.
And you have Meadowbrook Park when the conservationists were trying to buy the fairgrounds to extend Beauty Woods, it didn't work. This was political. So the funds went to Meadowbrook Park, and that's rather fun too.
It is. It's a great space. It's a magnet for people. It's a county-wide park. We don't consider it really an urbana park. It's designated really as a regional park because it's so big and it's so unique.
Yes.
So many different. I mean, there's sculpture, there are deer, there.
There are lots of deer.
There are lots
You
of
see
deer.
13 deer at once, and they look at you like you.
What are you doing here?
So you added Anita Purvis Center.
Yep.
And then you expanded Anita Purvis Center by
Yes.
$1 million.
Yes.
And have a shop and a museum and a viewing device for viewing birds.
Right. Nice
Yes,
bird watching space out of those windows
So,
in there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So some of us are familiar with Larson, who was there for a long time.
Oh yes.
And so, yeah, and in Crystal Lake Park, it's all rather exciting to be there. And you've been also involved in trails.
Absolutely. That's one of the 4 pillars of our new strategic plan is
And
trails.
if we get time, we'll go back to trying to
Okay.
get together the Kickapoo Trail and Champagne without getting killed in the process.
That is an excellent idea and hard to do.
Yes, so I have some thought on that. Yes, that as I look at my notes, that would go through the railroad yards and across the boneyard to Kerr and then perhaps around, or perhaps even through Beauty Woods, because there's a power line that goes through Beauty Woods and there's never going to be any trees there.
No, they're actively removing trees.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it could perhaps be a trail, because going around Beauty Woods is a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, yes, it is. Plus, there's a hill.
Yes.
I know. Well, maybe the novelty of it would attract people. I don't know.
Right near that hill is a black cemetery,
Yes.
and that's kind of unique. So, you're a conservationist at heart, and you have a woods down. We regard it as Farlow Road, but you say High Cross Road. So it's known as both because at Myra Station the road goes south to Sydney, and it's just right there. And I think you've donated some part of it to conservation. Is that right?
Yeah, we did have some farmland around our property. Our property is about 5 acres or so, half in woods and half in reconstructed prairie. And we did buy some farmland around there with the eventual idea of transferring it to the park district for a future park. That's been done.
That's very nice. It's on the backside of the Yankee Ridge Moraine, so you have a little rolling territory. You actually have a hill there. Yeah.
I believe I'd call it a slope. It sort of denigrates.
I
hills
grew
to
up
call it a hill.
I woke up to a 2,000-foot hill.
Oh wow.
So, you got involved with your prairie and burning your prairie. You got involved with Grand Prairie Friends that way. You asked them to could they help you?
Yes, that's true. When we decided to do the prairie, we did a lot of research online, reading about what to do. There was a program that the state of Illinois had at the time. I don't know if it's still viable, called Acres for Wildlife. And the rules were that if you had 2.5 acres minimum, and we had 2.7, so we just slipped in. You buy the seed, the owner would buy the seed, and they would provide all the equipment. They would plow the land, they would plant the seed. The first year they would come back and mow down all the weeds that sprung up before the prairie seeds came. And so that was really helpful to us. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure how we would have managed all that.
We still have been hoeing.
Yes. And one of the things that we learned early on was that prairie should be burned periodically. And so we did some research on that, and ran across Grand Prairie Friends, discovered Grand Prairie Friends, and contacted them and said, we've got this prairie. Are you the group that might do a burning for us? And they said yes, and we joined the group, and eventually I joined the board, and I'm still on the board.
Well, you were treasurer for 6
I
years.
was treasurer for a while, right? And that's a lot of work, and I was able to find somebody who would succeed me, and he's doing an admirable job as well.
But you also have a CEO in Sarah Livesey.
Livesey, yes. When I joined the board, the net asset value, the total of all the properties that we owned, cash and land, was something maybe around $250,000. Now we're up over $3 million. Wow. And that this growth has taken place largely in Coles County. In what we now collectively call the Warbler Ridge Conservation Area. Over 1,000 acres, just a tad over 1,000 acres down there, and this has really taken off. The acquisition of the property, more donations and so on have allowed us to hire an executive director, Sarah Livesey, as you mentioned. She's just done an outstanding job for us, and has allowed us to move forward with all our projects.
So you've mentioned that you're like 10 times larger now than you were back in the day. Can you give me a rough estimate of what percentage of it is actually prairie as opposed to forested area, just trees?
The percentages, I would say, over half certainly is forested, in spite of our name. But the land that we first bought down in Coles County was forested, and it was of significant conservation value. In fact, it's a land and water reserve now, registered with the state of Illinois. But some of the additional land that we've purchased down there is being restored in prairie. So it's not like we've forgotten our roots. But our grassroots.
We have other little prairies that you've been involved with. Lodi, I think you've been involved with. These are 3 cemetery prairies near Paxton, and we're interested in 10 mile of wide roadside there that might be useful. But let me digress and say that the Nature Preserves Commission will be meeting on Tuesday, starting at 10 o'clock. That's the time they usually start. They finish at 3 o'clock. And there will be at the Douglas Hart Nature Center in Mattoon. And it's there's a lot of legality behind these things. So, Fred, can you say something about that Nature Conservancy? You already mentioned that you're a land and water conservation easement.
Yes. I don't know too much about how the commission is organized. I know that there is a commission, and that when property owners wish to register a property as a land and water reserve or a nature preserve, they're not exactly the same thing. They submit a proposal to the commission. The commission meets, I think it's 4 times a year, and as you mentioned, a meeting is coming up next week in Coles County, and 2 of the Grand Prairie Friends properties there will be considered for registration as land and water reserves. So the commission meets, as I said, 4 times a year, and then they just consider proposals that private landowners, have put to them for properties that would be added to the nature preserve list or the land and water reserve list.
Yes, they have regionals, and so each regional director will present a case for a particular woodlot or a prairie or ecosystem of a different type, and it will be considered, and usually it takes several different meetings to approve. So I think this might be the last approval for Warbler Woods, 2 areas.
Is there a minimum Is there a minimum to the acreage to be considered?
No,
Uh-huh.
I would love to have larger areas.
Oh, sure, of course, but smaller is.
If it's too small, it's sometimes they're not in charge of owning it, except they are part of it, the Department of Natural Resources.
Right.
So some of the dedications are of natural resources areas. But
Okay.
if the donation is very small to the University of Illinois, for instance, they will hand it over to Parkland College or other groups that would be glad to have it. But they look for fairly large.
Large, right.
So working with a Natural History Survey
Mm-hmm.
and the Committee on Natural Areas out of the Graduate College. There's a balance between all these groups.
Right.
And, so I think yes, that's good. We've covered some of these things.
I'll pop in and mention you're listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM.
And it is pledge drive. Remember that we only have one opportunity to gather support from you. Fred is a photographer, and he also travel because you have a daughter in New Zealand.
Yes, we do.
and so I think I'll let you do some things that are a range of what you do. And he's brought a laptop, not a laptop, a pad. And so when we go to the help with Urbana Public Television, it's very important that we get the picture on long enough to see it. and so you're talking to the picture, and your pad is very helpful. So let me let you go through a number of pictures that you have in front of you.
First of all, I should say that I've had a camera and taken pictures for a long time. My father took a lot of pictures when I was growing up, and I kind of liked that. I guess got a camera when I was in high school, and I had a camera in graduate school. I finally bought a really good camera when I was in graduate school in Oregon. So Nancy and I were married in 1969 after I graduated from graduate school, and she graduated from University of Oregon as an undergraduate. So she knew I was interested in photography when we got married, but she didn't quite have a full realization of what that involved.
Yes.
And so she's got a nice story because I went to Glasgow University for my postdoctoral work. And so we'd go for walks around the place, and I'd always have my camera. And so we were walking down by the docks one time, and I saw something, and Nancy can tell you the rest.
The photo he's talking about is one of my favorite photographs. We didn't ever own a car in Glasgow. In fact, we didn't even own bicycles, so we were all on foot for almost 3 years in Glasgow. And Glasgow is a beautiful, wonderful city, but it's a cool place in many ways, but the temperature is cool. And I'm sure this was in a cool time of the year, because I think I remember other photos from it. And we'd been walking and walking and walking and walking and walking, and it's hard to entertain oneself when you're with a photographer, because they're always stopping and taking a picture and moving and taking a picture and considering it and moving a little. So I'm standing there and I'm kind of bored, and he's taking a picture of this stupid boat. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm tired, I'm cold, let's go back. Well, the picture that he took of a tugboat on the River Clyde is one of my all-time favorite photographs. So it's I learned something from that. I just, try to be patient.
We're all in the same boat.
Yeah, yes, that's right, in that
Every
tugboat, right.
and it doesn't always work. What we're doing here now, it doesn't always work. We have a glitch here and there, and you have to have a sense of humor about it.
That's right, that's right.
But it does take time.
It does,
So.
it does, and worth waiting for.
And I think as a photographer, um, you do some things a little differently than most people. Some people do this even without photographs, but still. The first thing I would say is you look down. You look for small details. For example, I was at Warbler Ridge one time, and I looked down and I saw these two acorn husks, not the acorns themselves, just the cups that the acorns had been in. And they were just nestled, lying there on the forest floor. And so I took a picture of it. It's a picture I like, but it's a kind of detail that people, when they're walking in the woods, just really tend to ignore. But as a photographer, you can't afford to ignore the things that are small. Another time, I was walking along again in Warbler Ridge, and right in the middle of the trail, so this one wasn't hard to miss, was a mushroom. It had just come up in the middle of the trail. Nobody had knocked it over, and so I had to get down on my stomach to take a picture of it. But
and then there's the laundry aspect of photography.
Yes.
Well, I have got down on my belly to take pictures like that, and I've got poison ivy as a result.
Oh no!
Well,
PI is our worst enemy.
One of the things first things you have to learn if you're going to be in the woods is to be able to identify poison ivy. And also, when I was looking down on that same trip, I saw this eastern box turtle. Usually they're off in the woods and you can't see them, but this guy was right next to the trail, so that was good. Another aspect of photography that most people don't do is to look closely at something, and it doesn't really matter what it is. You can look closely at a flower, like spiderwort that grows in the prairie, and especially if you go out after a rain. I have one photograph that shows a spiderwort plant with a little dewdrop hanging from a nearby leaf. And I like that. Also, you can see small flowers if you're looking down, but you're looking closely. So one of the flowers that blooms early on in the prairie is shooting star, and that one is fairly easy to see because the rest of the prairie plants aren't very big at the time that it blooms, so it's easy to see. And then later in the year, you see New England aster, which has a beautiful sort of a violet purple color. And they're nice to see from a distance, but if you look at them up close, you can really see the structure of the flower itself. Sometimes, when you're looking closely at things, you see something. I sometimes see things in a photograph that I didn't see when I was there originally. So, for example, I've got a picture of a fall sunflower, and there's a little bee on it. It's a solitary bee. I don't know exactly what species it is, but that's something that I enjoy finding in my photographs after the fact. And of course, there are the denizens of the prairie that are easy to see, like monarch butterflies. I have lots of pictures of monarchs and praying mantises. We have two species of praying mantis here. One's a really big one. It's almost as big as your hand. That's introduced from China. It's called the Chinese mantis. The local one is only about a third of that size, called the Carolina mantis. And then the third thing is just grand vistas. Those are the kinds of scenes where, as a tourist, you're at a place and you think, "Oh wow," mm-hmm. And it can be hard to capture that in a photograph. I have one photograph that I particularly like from Canyonlands National Park. If you look close, you see some mesas in the background. If you look closely, you can see the cars in a car park way off in the distance there, which gives you some sense of scale. And of course, the prairie itself lends itself to panoramas. And one of the things you can do in photography is you can take several images and sort of stitch them together to get a panorama. And that's a very nice technique, and it gives you a nice sense of scale. I've got sunset pictures. I've got pictures of the prairie with different flowers showing, so you get different colors. And those are all really nice things to look for.
You're thinking of doing a book with Jamie Ellis, and they're asking you for panoramas.
Yes, actually, we have done a book in the sense that the manuscript is finished, the photos are selected. It has been accepted for publication by Southern Illinois University Press. We expect it to come out maybe 14, 15 months from now, so fall, winter next year. So it's early in the process, but they have asked for some overall shots that show the prairie.
Well, you get involved in other things, like you visited the eclipse, the recent eclipse, and you have a series of photographs of the moon moving across the sun.
Yes. When I knew the eclipse was coming, I thought this is something that I want to photograph. What my goal, my ideal was to get a picture of the sun's corona, which you can only get during a total eclipse of the sun. And so a year ahead of time, I drove down to Southern Illinois to try to find a place to set up for my photography. I wasn't just going to sit there and watch it. I needed a place to have my tripod, no interference from any place, and so on and so forth. So in the end, we went down to Goreville, and lots of other people went there too.
Yeah.
So I didn't.
Lots and lots.
I didn't set up exactly where I had expected to, but there was a farmer who had an open field. It was just used as pasture, and he was renting it out, I think $10 or something to park in the place. And I mean, it was a bargain, believe me. And so we were there, and there was lots of open space. And I set up my camera equipment and took a series of shots of the eclipse. And I did get the corona, so I was able to achieve what I wanted to do. But I did put the shots together into a panorama, sort of 5 pictures in a row, and framed. So that's been a very popular item.
Well, you also go to New Zealand, which has glaciers and fjords on one end and mud pools on the other.
It has everything, plus very lovely people.
New Zealand was more settled by landed gentry than in Australia. In Australia is more like convicts that couldn't
Right.
come to the U.S.
The third sons of the Scottish nobility, I think, a lot of them
Yes.
came to New Zealand. It's
so
a whole different vibe.
Even the speech patterns
Oh.
are different.
Right.
And you have Maoris, but they're a minority group. But
Right.
they were even trading potatoes and things like that from island to island, so they were reasonably sophisticated.
Right.
Whereas the Australian Aboriginal is a Stone Age person, a very sophisticated Stone Age person.
Yes, indeed.
But not as developed as this. It's a different group. It's Oceania. That
Yes.
The Maoris belong to.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's been interesting to see. We have granddaughters in elementary school now. It's interesting to see how much of the Maori world is presented to them essentially, I think, on a daily basis in school. The Maori culture is really a part of New Zealand, I think, in ways that we haven't seen in any other place we've been. I think the indigenous people, I mean, nobody's treated indigenous people very well, but I think the current New Zealanders are doing a pretty good job of really putting the culture with respect for the current population into their country.
I can remember the day when the New Zealand football teams came as far as Australia, but couldn't go to South Africa because our Maoris were not.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
good footballers.
Yes, yes. Our son-in-law is a big rugby fan. So we've heard many stories about South Africa and
Yes.
New Zealand.
Then we didn't sort of run through some of the things that you see at Wobbler Woods, for instance, but you've mentioned them in your photographs, and I think you might have more.
Yes, I do. warbler woods.
Well, you might even have some, while we're at it, you might even have some photographs of New Zealand.
I have those too. Which do you want to do first?
I think since we've talked about New Zealand and Australia, let's do those first, I think.
Okay. New Zealand is, as Nancy said, it's really a wonderful place, and in my opinion, New Zealand has more places of interest to visit, especially natural areas, per unit of area of the country,
Yeah.
right, of any other place in the world. Maybe Sri Lanka, I suppose. I've not been there, but it's just amazing. The South Island and the North Island are really different. In the South Island, which we visited first, we went down around Franz Josef, which is a town. There's a Franz Josef Glacier too, which we didn't really get to see very much, but we were in Franz Josef around sunset, so I have this picture that I really like of the mountains as the sun is setting. And again, it's one of these serendipitous things. Sometimes things are in your picture that you didn't think were in your picture, and there's a bird flying by, which helps to make the picture, which I was completely unaware of when I was setting
You're
it
not
up.
supposed to admit that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's good to admit that, because then when people try getting their own photographs and they don't get quite what they want, they say, oh, well, there's a certain amount of luck involved here, and I
That's
just
true.
didn't have it there. We did see some of the glaciers around Lake Wanaka. My daughter and I actually took a flight around the mountains there, and so you got a chance to see the glacier from the air, which was always very interesting. And of course, there are lots of fjords, as I think Dave mentioned. We took a cruise on a place called Doubtful Sound. The name has a really interesting origin. James Cook was the person who did most of the early exploration of the New Zealand area. And he saw these sounds, these fjords coming in on the west side. And he saw this one and he said, no, I don't think we'll go in there. Remember, they had these big sailing vessels. He said, I don't think we'll go in there because I doubt we'll be able to turn around. And so the name stuck, Doubtful Sound. Right.
He was very cautious. He had botanists with him, and botanists were wanting to go into those fjords.
Absolutely.
And he said, no, I'm not going to go in there because I don't they're so deep I don't have an anchor.
Oh, of course.
So, but he was very strong on it.
Yeah. And in fact, the strait between the two islands is called Cook Strait now. And then we also visited, on our most recent visit, we spent more time on the North Island. There's a lot of volcanic activity there. There's a place called Tapuia, which is a Maori reserve, and there's a lot of volcanic activity we can see there. And then my son and our son-in-law took a trip to White Island, which is restricted. Only tours and scientific expeditions can go there because it is an active volcano. And so we were given hard hats. I thought, okay. Actually, we had to sign a waiver first, which essentially said, if you die, it's not our fault.
We told you.
That's right. That's
It is
right.
a volcano.
And yeah, it is an active volcano. And then we were given gas masks, and I thought, well, that's kind of for show, a little over the top. But when I got to the island, I thought, okay, it's not for show, because the atmosphere was so filled with sulfuric acid and other
Yes.
fumes that really were acrid on the throat that I wore that gas mask all the time. So that was a really good trip.
And then you went to Australia for a while,
And then we did. Last year we went to Australia, the whole family, almost the whole family. And one of the things we did there was we took a tour on the Adelaide River, which is up north near Darwin in the Northwest Territories, it's up at the sort of very far northern part of eastern Australia. And one of the significant features of the Adelaide River is it's full of crocodiles. There are two kinds of crocodiles, essentially, in Australia. The Australians call them freshies and salties because there are freshwater crocodiles, which are the smaller kind, and then there are the saltwater crocodiles, which, in spite of their name, can survive in freshwater as well as saltwater, so they're much more adaptable. They're really big. 15 feet is not uncommon at all.
And the way to tell the difference, if it's swimming away from you, it's a freshie. If it's swimming toward you, that they told us, it's a salty. I don't know. I mean,
that's right. No, that's right. That's what they said. And keep your hands inside the boat.
Oh.
So our grandkids, with encouragement from the tour boat operators, started counting the crocodiles. So we went up and back. So there was some double counting. But not a whole lot, and they counted 102. 102.
And they do get people every once in a while.
And they do get people once in a while, right?
Well, and not surprising when you see the size of them.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm going to jump in really quickly here. Normally, WEFT is a very quiet place on Sunday morning. You may have noticed if you're listening at home that there's a lot of banging around in voices. WEFT Fest is coming up really soon now. That means getting lots of stuff out of the building here and into the beer garden next door to us. I'll go ahead and mention really quickly here, the music starts at 2, but the beer garden will actually be open for WEFT Fest even before that. Feel free to come on down and actually help us to celebrate our birthday today right next door at the Seven Saints Beer Garden. Again, anytime after 1 o'clock, come on down. And please pardon the banging that you hear here. It's not us. It's just getting ready for a big party. Next.
So
I'm done.
So let me just wrap up Australia. We from Darwin we took a train. It's called the Ghan. It goes all the way down to Adelaide, right through the middle of the country. That was really interesting. They have a number of tours. On one of the tours, we did actually get to see a freshwater crocodile, which, as I said, is a lot smaller. Once we got down to Adelaide, we spent some time around there, Kangaroo Island, then we went to Sydney. I really liked our time at Sydney because there is a huge national park called Royal National Park. It's just south of Sydney. The coastline is spectacular. You've got these huge cliffs that you hike along, and it's just gorgeous. The day I was there, it was a beautiful day, bright, sunny, cloudless sky. And there are lots of birds, and I like to photograph birds. And one particular bird that I saw is called a New Holland honey eater, right? New Holland honey eater. And some of the individuals of this bird that I saw at the beginning were a little shy, and so I wasn't getting really good photographs. But on my way back from the hike along the coast, I saw one bird. And it apparently was as curious about me as I was about it. And it kept flying close, but it would be behind things. So I got these photographs of sort of fuzzy, out of focus grasses in the foreground and the bird in the background. And then eventually it came out and it just sort of posed for me there. That happens once in a while, but it was really great to see.
The wildlife is fairly natural. My father had a pet kookaburra, and it would come down and land on his shoulder.
Really?
And he had the attraction of feeding it some steak.
That would help.
He called it Martha, and he and Martha used to be quite friends.
I only knew kookaburras from the Girl Scouts and the song. And kookaburra sits in the old gum tree. Yeah, well, I didn't realize that when they're sitting in the old gum tree, they are making an incredible racket. They are terribly noisy animals.
Add the cockatoos.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot speak to each other.
You feel like you're under attack.
Yes.
And then there are the birds that sound like someone's slowly strangling another person, which is a lot of interesting wildlife in Australia. Our grandson, who is normally a very adventuresome soul, said, I'm not going to Australia because there's so many things there that can kill you.
Well, yes, if we lift up a board, you always look because there might be a black snake underneath it.
And our son has a picture of a spider dragging a dead mouse up the side of a refrigerator, which is a little off-putting when you think of the size.
He didn't take it.
No, Oh, no, he has found online.
Found
he did
online,
not. We
that's
did not personally, fortunately, see this. But yeah, that's a big spider to drag a mouse.
Yeah.
We did not, however, run into anything remotely dangerous.
Except for the crocodiles, and we were in the boats. That
and
was
our,
good.
along
And you
with our
had
hands.
a telescopic lens.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Although
you're-
they were, 8-10 feet away. We were close. Yeah, they weren't. I mean, they're big. They're scary. They weren't. They weren't on the bank thinking, "Oh dear, we have to get out of here," and they're used to the boats.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, they were just there sunning in their prehistoric style.
Yeah, and some of the tour guide operators, we were told, and we actually saw this bait the crocs. They take a chicken carcass or something and put it on the end of a fishing rod and
Yeah.
hold it out. And then the crocs, I mean, this shows you how strong these things are. They will jump up. So you've got a 15-foot croc, and they will jump up the length of their body out of the water. And that's why we were told keep your hands in, because they're used to seeing things over the boat that's food, right?
And we didn't want our grandchildren in that position.
Right.
So, yes, do a little bit more promotional on your Warbler Woods, because I'm encouraging people to go to that meeting. The meetings are of the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission are oscillated around the state, so they're not always near to us, and this one is quite near to us. And so I'd asked you to do something about the Warbler Woods, and so you've done a little bit on your photographs, but give us a little bit more of a tickler for Warbler Woods.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. I love to promote Warbler Woods. As I said before, we have about 1,000 acres, just a tad over 1,000 acres down there. And it's one thing to protect land. It's another thing to make land, promote land for public use. And one of the things that the Grand Prairie Friends Board has done is they've paid for trails to be put in. We now have 10 miles of marked trails down there. Some of them go through the woods and the ravines. Some of them go through flat bottom land. So it's a great place to visit. There are 3 different parking areas we've got, so I encourage people to go down there if they have a chance. When I'm down there, you can go down there any time of the year. Spring is great because you get open vistas. There are no leaves on the trees. A little cool, of course, but then you can see what the terrain is like. We've even got benches in places so you can sit and look out over the terrain.
It's the Unbar River.
The Umbra River is right near there. Right, it goes down on the west side of the property complex. Spring's also a good time for bird watching. If you go even before the spring migration, it's good because there are no leaves on the trees, and so red-headed woodpeckers you can see, and the other photo that I've got that I included here is an eastern wood pewee. There are lots of birds that come through in the spring migration. Of course, then the leaves are out, so they're a little harder to see. You really need an expert, or at least I do, to see them. The other thing about spring is, of course, spring wildflowers. And the spring wildflowers come out before the leaves do. That's their niche, if you will. So they come out, there's still lots of sunlight on the forest floor because the leaves aren't out, and so you get spring beauty, which is the one that's all over the place around here. It's all over Busey Woods, as an example. Dutchman's breeches, which look a little bit like the old pantaloons that Dutchman apparently wore 200 or 300 years ago. Cutleaf toothwort, which has a very pretty flower and very distinctive leaves, so it's pretty easy to see. And then, of course, later you get trees blooming as well, red buds. All of these flowers are there. Of course, you can see them in Busey Woods as well. But if you go down there and hike in the spring, it's really wonderful to see all these.
And you do have prairies. I'm looking at a picture of a yellow coneflower with a monarch butterfly on it.
Right. We do have prairies, so the summer is good. You can see blooming prairies, lots of yellow covered, lance-leaved coreopsis, orange colored butterfly, milkweed, and hikes in the woods where you can see the trails or you use the trails on the ravines. And fall is a good time too. You get different flowers in the fall, and then you get the monarchs through.
New England aster here.
Right. Some of the fall flowers you can see are ironweed, which is a fairly large plant, easy to see, nice sort of purpley violet color. More delicate blue, there's a flower called mist flower, which I didn't know before I had gone down there. And the green-headed coneflower, which seems like a misnomer because the petals are actually yellow. It's called green-headed because the center part where the seeds form are what turn green, and that's the one with the monarch on it. And then, of course, in the fall, you get fall colors. There are lots of trees in the woods, on the ravines, that turn this gorgeous, gorgeous yellow. You go down there on a nice sunlit day, and everything just has this golden glow to it because the sunlight is being filtered through the forest leaves, and all the leaves are this kind of orange or yellow color.
Some of these forests or woods have been cut over. So do you have a whole bunch of maple trees that are young competing with each other?
Yes, the woods, none of this is virgin forest. It's all been logged. But the first property we bought, 144 acres, had not been logged for, I don't think, it was something like 50 or 60 years. It had been 50 or 60 years since the last logging. And even better, the logging had not been clear cutting. It had been selective logging. So they had gone in and had taken out the big trees, but they left ones that were maybe a foot in diameter or something like that. Well, now they're 2 or 3 feet in diameter. So that was what made it such a high quality site. And we, what was your question?
No,
Maples.
I was going to say.
Oh, maple. Yes, exactly right. Oak hickory forests, which is what these were originally, are what the ecologists call a climax forest. In other words, it won't change from that. And the reason it works is that there is no maple there. And oak trees need a certain amount of sunlight as seedlings or they die. When sugar maple invades a place and comes into a place, then sugar maple tends to take over because sugar maple doesn't need as much sunlight to grow vigorously. They do grow very fast, and they form a fairly dense shade canopy. And so if you allow too much sugar maple to grow up, then you'll kill all the oak seedlings. You completely change the nature of the forest. So as part of our management techniques, we actually cut out all of the sugar maple that we can see so that we retain the original oak hickory nature of the forest.
Well, I'm looking at my time. I've got 5 minutes. And I want to remind you that we do have a map that Fred has provided of Orville Woods. You basically go to 130 east of Urbana, and then you drive straight, and you go past Charleston. It's very near to Charleston, and you go a little south of there. Then you might have to ask somebody where to go, but it's a wiggly woggly road about 3 miles south of the dam that is there, and I don't know the name of the dam, but it provides Charleston with water. And so yeah, we'll give you a map, but if you don't get our map, you can get it from Grand Prairie Friends.
Right. If you go to the Grand Prairie Friends website, you can download a map that shows some of the hiking trails. There's actually a nature app, a hiking app rather, that you can download. I think costs 99 cents or something like that. We have spots along the trails marked, and then if you have your smartphone and the app, then it'll tell you a little something about what's in those areas. One of the things that I should mention, my wife thankfully reminded me, this is why married men live longer than single men. They don't get themselves into quite so much trouble. We have had Grand Prairie Friends has had significant help in acquiring all the properties down there, and the most consistent donor for us has been the Lumpkin Family Foundation. They were the ones who in fact had the first concept of a greenway between Charleston and Fox Ridge State Park, and so they've really been enormously helpful. We couldn't have done all this without them.
Okay. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. So, David, why don't you promote the festival today? It often just gets friends and relatives, but it's very friendly. And there are a few booths out there. And just know that WEFS has been around for 35 years now. And it's survived, and it's rather difficult for a non-profit agency to survive. So, yeah, say something about what WEF does.
It sounds like at this point we're done with the actual talking with your guests. So maybe you want to finish with them.
Okay, we'll say thank you.
You're done now. Good night.
Thank you for coming both, and it's interesting to learn little bits and pieces about what we do.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us.
Yes, thank you.
It's a great chance to talk about Grand Prairie Friends properties.